They came to the door and said that they were DTE employees and that they were checking for a gas leak.
A completely disturbing and unforgivable act, in my opinion.
We're DTE, we're checking for gas leaks.
Mr. Hernandez and Mrs. Zuazo came into the house, and my husband was going to show them where the basement was.
When we asked him why only one victim was killed, he became irate and yelled something along the lines of, "What do you mean, why did we kill only one? It wasn't supposed to go down like that."
While we wait to be permitted to go back inside of the Florida courtroom where we're watching the case against Leslie Boileau, we are going to take you into a Michigan courtroom for a case that you no doubt remember from last year. Men posing as fake utility workers accused of murder.
Carlos Hernandez and Joshua Zuazo, both men charged with felony murder and 2 counts of unlawful imprisonment, accused of posing as utility workers to get inside the home of Linda and Hussein Murray, the owners of a jewelry store.
Now, Linda was allegedly tied up with duct tape and hit by the defendants, and her husband was taken down to the basement of their home to gain access to a safe. That's where he was killed.
Let's go back into the courtroom. Let's go in now for the beginning of the state's opening statement.
May it please the court, counsel. Almost exactly 1 year ago to today's date, Linda Murray and her husband, Hussein Murray, were enjoying the life that they had built over 54 years of marriage. They had raised a family, they were enjoying their grandkids. They had a house that was very nice in Rochester Hills that they had bought after 30 years of her husband, who goes by Sam, running 2 businesses. One was a pawn shop, one is a jewelry store, and their life was going along just like a storybook. But you'll hear that this story doesn't start off with once upon a time, because it doesn't have a fairy tale ending, and it doesn't have a happily ever after. And that's because on October 10th of 2024, the defendant and his co-defendant, Joshua Zuazo, knocked on their door. They knocked on their door at 10 p.m. Sam went to the door, opens the door. The defendant and his co-defendant are posing as DT workers. They start trying to get into the house. The defendant, Hernandez, is doing the talking. He's also the closest one to the door. Zuazo is behind him. And you'll see this because it's captured on Ring camera. And he's saying, "We're in the neighborhood, there's a gas leak." And Linda is at the top of the stairs because she was in the bedroom, and she's looking down, and she says she can see them at the door frame. And she can also see them because the Ring camera bounces to her phone, so she can also see what's going on through the Ring camera. And she yells down to her husband, "It's kind of late for a gas meter check." And they start still trying to get in with Hernandez, trying to get in. They have to check to see if you have a gas leak inside. And Linda is suspicious, and she yells down, "Sam, do you have your gun?" Because Sam was known to carry his gun on his right hip. He would carry a Glock, part of the business of pawn shop owning down in Hamtramck, part of the business of jewelry store owning. It can be dangerous. He was armed. Sam isn't going to let him in the house at 10 o'clock. So he tells him, "You're not coming in." At that point, Hernandez says, "Well, we'll come back tomorrow." So the door is shut, the defendant and his co-defendant leave. But that was not the end of the story. And in fact, little did they know, it wasn't even the start of the story. Because this was not random, this was not an accident, it was not coincidence that they showed up at his house. This was targeted, and this was very well planned. And you'll hear through the witnesses that way before October 10th, defendant Hernandez had been putting this in the works. You're going to hear that a year earlier, that in fact, we have the receipts as the investigation progressed, that in fact Hernandez had been to that jewelry and pawn shop, that he had pawned items at that store. We have those receipts. We also will show that he came back in February of 2024 to pick up his items. And you'll also hear how he specifically asked to meet with the owner when he was there to pick up his items that last time. And in fact, one of the witnesses was there when he was introduced to Sam, the owner, face to face. It's a business where people carry cash. It's a people may keep things of value at the house. So what Hernandez does at that point is he puts into work posing as a DTA. He goes out, orders signs that say DTA to put on the sign of the vehicle. We have that video of him at the store ordering it, picking it up, him and his wife, Amanda. You're going to hear that, in fact, they didn't use, he has a white Jeep that he came up from Texas with. And he would come up back and forth from Texas with his wife, Amanda, back to Michigan, because Amanda's mother, Danielle, lives here. You'll hear they have a white Jeep, but they're not putting that DT sticker on the white Jeep. Instead, they're using a stolen vehicle, a stolen SD 250 that was stolen about 10 days earlier. That's what they're going to use to get there. And in fact, also other indicia of being DT as they try to pose as DT agents as they come in. Then you're going to hear that, in fact, the next morning, about, again, 10, 11 a.m., you're going to hear Linda had gone to a doctor's appointment. She had gone by herself. She had gotten back home. Sam's car, which was an older Audi, always in the same spot, very visible from the road. The Audi was also visible at his store. He would park where anybody could see. That's an Audi. That goes with Sam. So you could tell that Sam is home. Well, when Linda gets back in, Sam has just finished cooking food for his employees. It's a Friday. He's planning on going in about noon, and he's bringing food to feed them. So that's on the kitchen counter. When Linda gets there, she starts cooking breakfast. And then there's the second knock on the door, which changes everything. And again, it's defendant Hernandez and defendant Zuazo at the door. Again, Sam is armed with his Glock on his waist. But this time, they talk their way into the residence. And as they come in, Linda will tell you that she recognized him from the night before. She's already testified about this at preliminary exam. She's already identified both of these guys at exam under oath. She'll say, I'll recognize them. It's the same guys from the night before. As they come in, she was maybe 10 feet away from the door. And they want to check the furnace downstairs in the basement. And this time, they're starting to go downstairs. She'll say that there's a weird segment where defendant Hernandez says he has to go back to the truck. So there's about 67 seconds when he's out of view, but she doesn't think he actually went out of the house again because the alarm when you go in and out didn't click. So she doesn't think he actually ever left a second time. And then Zuazo is kind of lingering off to the side. At that point in time, Sam is going to show them down into the basement where the gas hooks up inside. And you'll hear Sam is leading the way downstairs, and behind him is Zuazo, and behind him is defendant Hernandez, who closes the door. And that's going to be the last time Linda ever sees her husband alive. She'll say that at that point she went back to cooking, and probably another 10 or 15 minutes she's trying to cook and finish breakfast. She doesn't hear anything. She doesn't hear any commotion downstairs. She'll tell you that her husband Sam was not a quiet guy. You know, he was a naturally loud talker, but she doesn't hear anything. But instead, she'll tell you that defendant Hernandez comes up from downstairs. And when he comes up, and you can see he's a big, imposing guy, when he comes up, he says, "Where's the money?" "What? Where's the money? Where's the safe? Where's the jewels?" She's like, "I got cash in my purse." And she says she had about $300 cash in her purse. And she'll say, "We don't have the safe. There's no safe." So what about the jewels? And she'll say, "The jewels are in a safety deposit box. I got costume jewelry upstairs. That's all I got." At that point in time, she starts saying, "Where's my husband? Where's my husband?" Hernandez doesn't answer. Then you're going to hear Zuazo comes up from downstairs. And she says, "Where's my husband?" And Zuazo says, "He's sleeping." And at that point in time, she sees blood on the front of Zuazo's shirt. She starts screaming. She's getting upset. So Hernandez hauls off and slugs her in the face. And you'll see the left side of her face and how it's bruised. He then puts her against the wall, so you're going to stop screaming. And she says she'll stop screaming. At which point in time, he puts her in the kitchen and starts to bind her with duct tape. And when he binds her with duct tape...
Oh, this is a tough case. We are going to get to a break. When we come back, we're going to hear the rest of these opening statements from this Michigan prosecutor there in the case against two men accused of posing as utility workers and committing murder. Tonight on Closing Arguments, Vinnie Politan is back in studio as a man confesses to killing his parents on live TV. We talked to the news director about the confession.
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
4 dead students.
None of it seemed to make any sense.
He was evil.
What devastation.
All I can do is scream.
Victim to Verdict with Ted Rowlands. New episode Saturday night, 8 Eastern and Pacific.
Only on Court TV. Welcome back to Court TV Live. If you're wondering, what about that Florida trial? We're going back there as soon as the imposed 30-minute delay is over after the lunch break, so we're heading there in a bit. But let's go back to Michigan. We're watching the opening statements in the home invasion murder trial.
The defendants here are Carlos Hernandez and Joshua Zuazo. They're charged with murder and unlawful imprisonment in the death of a pawn shop owner, jeweler Hussein Murray. He's the victim here. His wife was also a victim inside of that home. Prosecutors say these two men posed as utility workers looking for gas leaks and used that lie to gain access to the home.
Then they bound the victim and his wife, duct taped them before robbing them, beat the wife, though she did survive. But Hussein was found dead in the basement with duct tape around his face, hands, and feet. Let's head back more. The state's opening.
You'll see the first deputy who's there. He goes through the house. Eventually, you'll see that there's a lot of other deputies that respond also. You'll see the scene. And when you go downstairs and you see the scene, you'll see how brutally Sam was demolished. Physically just demolished. He's dead at the scene. There's no reviving him. As you've maybe figured out through our jury selection, the media quickly is on this case. Quickly, the Ring videos are out there to the public very quickly. And very quickly, Hernandez and Zuazo become suspects and of interest to the sheriff's office. Very quickly. And you're going to hear what Hernandez did after he leaves that scene. He goes, puts that truck in Detroit and sets it ablaze. Destroys the truck. You'll hear from the Detroit folks who responded to that scene just trying to demolish any type of evidence that's in the truck. It's ablaze. It's on fire. We know it's the truck. Then he hits the road with his wife. I think it's her child and I think a couple pets. And they're headed out of here back to where we knew they lived at after they became a focus back in Texas. So you hear quickly that the sheriff office is on that. Sheriff office is putting out notices all the way through the path of where we expect them to be driving. And Louisiana comes across them first. And we have a detective from Louisiana flying up here. He's going to talk to you about everything that happened in Louisiana. And you're going to hear very clearly that when they go through that car, there's a lot of things of value that they find in that car for our case. They're going to tell you that they come across 3 pairs of size 13 Nikes. And on the bottom and on the inside of one of those pair of size 13 Nikes is blood, and the DNA comes back to the victim. You're going to hear that there's 2 other pairs of size 13 Nikes that aren't bloody. And then you'll hear that there's a size 11 tan work boots that also has blood on it, that also comes back to the victim. Then you're going to see, as they went through it, that there's a white size 5XL t-shirt with blood on it that comes back to the victim. You're going to hear that they also discover jewelry boxes in his luggage that he has packed up. And those jewelry boxes are very distinct. That costume jewelry is very distinct, and Linda will tell you that that's my stuff. And then you're going to hear that one of the things they also find in there is this POCO license plate, which was the original license plate on the burnt-up vehicle before it got stolen. That goes back to the owner of that place. So you'll hear there's a conversation that takes place between the investigators and defendant Hernandez down in Louisiana. You'll play that for you. And then you're going to hear all these parts coming together to show you that not only was there DNA on the items that were found in Louisiana, but the crime scene folks also processed the actual basement crime scene. And you're going to hear that both defendants' DNA are found inside that basement, inside that crime scene, on pieces of duct tape that were used. And I think it's not going to be easy to watch. There's no two ways to say it. The pictures are not easy. The story is not easy. But I believe at the end of this case, after you've heard the testimony, after you've seen the evidence that we produce, and after Judge Polis reads to you the law that applies in this case, I believe you'll find the defendant guilty as charged on all the counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua.
Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, you do not have an easy job ahead of you. As we discussed in voir dire, you will be presented with unpleasant facts, photos, and testimony. You will have to set your feelings of sympathy aside and function as that machine that we discussed again in voir dire. You must take the facts, the testimony, and the evidence and apply it only to the elements of the crimes that Mr. Hernandez is charged with. Now, in an opening statement, it's our opportunity to introduce you to the people you will either hear from or hear about. This is extremely important because you as juror members have to determine who did what and why. The prosecutor and I will stand up here and argue our own theories of how the events unfolded, but ultimately, you make the final decision. Now, as you've heard in your preliminary instructions and the prosecutor touched on, my client is charged with 1 count of first-degree felony murder. And because the elements are so important, I want to go over them now. To prove this charge, the prosecutor must prove each and every one of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Remember, not just 1 or 2, but all. First, that Mr. Hernandez caused the death of Hussein Murray, that he died as a result of neck compression and blunt force trauma. Second, that Mr. Hernandez had one of these 3 states of mind. He intended to kill, he intended to do great bodily harm, or he knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would be the likely result of his actions. Third, that when he did the act that caused the death of Mr. Murray, that Mr. Hernandez was committing or attempting to commit or helping someone else commit the crime of larceny. Larceny is the taking of property with intent to permanently deprive the owner of that property. Fourth, that the killing was not justified, excused, or done under circumstances that reduce it to a lesser crime. I do not believe that the prosecutor will be able to prove to you that my client had any of the required states of mind for this charge. As you've also been told, my client is charged in count 2 and count 3, so 2 counts of the same charge, unlawful imprisonment. There is 1 charge as to Mr. Murray and 1 charge as to Mrs. Murray. The elements are the same. First, that Mr. Hernandez knowingly restrained in count 2 Mr. Murray and in count 3 Mrs. Murray. Restrain means to restrict someone's movements without their consent or lawful authority. Second, that the restrained person was secretly confined or the person was restrained to facilitate the commission of another felony or to facilitate flight after the commission of another felony. I know this is a lot of information, but I promise you, by the time you go back into that jury room, you will know these elements and you're going to be given a paper copy of them. Now, through witnesses, you're going to hear that on October 10th in the city of Rochester Hills, 2 men appeared at the Murray's door in the evening claiming to be DTE employees looking for a gas leak. You'll hear that they were not allowed in because it was late. You will hear that the following morning, those same individuals came back and at that time were allowed in the house by Mr. Murray. Approximately 20 minutes after they were let in, the individuals left. You will come to know that Mr. Murray was found deceased in the basement, and Mrs. Murray was wrapped with duct tape, and she was able to call 911 a few minutes later. Now, from the testimony, the videos, and the photograph, it will be clear to you that Mr. Hernandez was one of the individuals inside that residence on October 10th and October 11th. I will not insult your intelligence and try to convince you otherwise. But what I will convince you of is that the unfortunate death of Mr. Murray was never part of the plan, never even part of the discussion between Mr. Hernandez and the other individual. It will be clear to you that Mr. Hernandez did not take part in the beating of Mr. Murray. I do not believe that the prosecutor will be able to prove that Mr. Hernandez had any of the 3 required states of mind that must be present for felony murder. At the close of this case, it will be clear that there is only one verdict that is consistent with the law and consistent with the evidence that was presented. It'll be clear to you that the prosecutor is not able to prove by any standard, much less beyond a reasonable doubt, that my client, Mr. Hernandez, committed the offense of first-degree felony murder. And at that time, I will stand before you again and ask you to return a verdict of not guilty on count 1. Thank you.